Welcome to Making Leaders, a series of podcast interviews with people who are leaders of this fast-changing industry, whether they're veterans of the industry or in the very early stages of their careers. The goal of Making Leaders is to focus attention on talent attraction and leadership development. They're vital elements in the success of the space and satellite industry at a time when we are in relentless competition for the best and the brightest with the best known names in technology. My name is Robert Bell, and I'm Executive Director of SSPI. My thanks go to Access Intelligence, Airbus OneWeb Satellites, AVL Technologies, Hughes Network Systems, EchoStar, Maxar Technologies, Northrop Grumman Space Systems, SES Global, and STE Engineering iDirect for supporting the Making Leaders campaign throughout the year and making this podcast possible. In 2020, SSPI once again partnered with the U.S. branch of the Students for the Exploration and Development of Space, or SEDS, on a research competition for students in university chapters of the organization. Our title was Taking Out the Trash, and the topic was space debris. There are more than 500,000 pieces of junk orbiting the Earth, and those are just the ones that are big enough to see. The future of a space economy literally depends on solving the problem of all that dangerous debris circling in low Earth orbit at fantastic speed. Ignore the problem long enough, and we will deny ourselves access to the final frontier. In this competition, we asked student teams to research the problem and recommend technical, political, and economic solutions that could reduce the volume of new debris and remove existing debris from orbit. 9 university teams in all accepted our challenge, and in November of 2020, 2 were selected by our panel of judges as first and second place prize winners. Today, we're speaking with members of one of the winning teams who are students at the University of Colorado at Boulder. And of course, in the age of COVID, they are actually staying home and attending classes remotely. The team members are Andrew Swackhammer, Mac Rogers, Evie Clark, Devin De Silva, and Skylar Gale. In today's conversation, we get to talk with 2 of them, Andrew Swackhammer and Mac Rogers. So welcome, and let's start this out by finding out a little bit about you. Would you introduce yourselves and tell us about your course of study? And why don't we start with you, Andrew?
Hi, Robert. Thank you so much for having us on and for putting on this competition. I know I speak for myself, Mac, and everyone when I say that this was incredibly valuable to all of us. So like you said, my name is Andrew Swackhammer. I'm a junior at the University of Colorado Boulder, and I'm studying aerospace engineering.
Interesting. And Mac, how about yourself?
Yeah, thank you for inviting us on, Robert. I am Mac Rogers. I am also a junior at the University of Colorado Boulder, studying astrophysics and music with a specialty in voice.
Great combination. Great combination. One or the other of those careers is going to have to work out, you know. What was it that attracted you both to this taking out the trash competition? Because, you know, going in, you had to know it was a fair amount of work outside of class.
It actually came at kind of the perfect time because I was in the midst of a gap year where I was kind of taking classes part-time, just 1 to 2 classes online. And one thing that I started noticing was that I had started missing the feeling of interacting with other students who had a passion for space just like I did on a daily basis, you know, whether it be participating in lectures or working together on labs. That started, that feeling of that gap really started to grow over the course of that gap year. Specifically as it relates to this competition, I was kind of poring around and looking for ways to sort of fill this void, and I knew that SEDS, the CU SEDS chapter, had routinely hosted student competitions and projects in the past. So in terms of what specifically appealed to me about this taking out the trash competition, it's kind of a bit of a funny side note. So one of the things that I like to do is I keep a list on my phone of kind of crazy and outlandish entrepreneurial ideas, which are honestly more like thought exercises than anything. And a couple of years ago, I actually wrote something down about like a space waste management service, like the big green and yellow WM, but just, you know, in space and then satellites. anyways, so a service that would capture space debris and burn it up by sending it into the sun. Um, so, once I started learning more about like orbital mechanics and the physics side of things, like the delta V requirements and things like that, that starts to sound completely ridiculous. But I remember it being kind of the first time I'd actually thought about space debris, specifically anthropogenic space debris. And reading through this project kind of brought me back to that and kind of reawakened that curiosity. And so, yeah, I mean, that was pretty much the genesis for why I joined.
Space waste management. I like it. There's, of course, are some companies now. Astroscale is probably in the lead right now with somebody thinks there's a commercial proposition there, which is very exciting. Mac, how about you? What caught your attention?
So I had a slightly different path than Andrew. I had a friend who was initially involved in the project, but due to her being brilliant, she ended up graduating a year early and going to law school. So, that some things just got in the way, but before she left, she introduced me to this project. And with much of my endeavor into space policy, I kind of just stumbled into it in a weird way. I went into college very gung ho about astrophysics, learning to study Mars and how it works and planetary science. And then I was going to sing to the stars while doing it. And now I'm researching space policy. And so one thing led to another, and she introduced me to this project. And at this time, I had a growing interest in policy. I started seeing how the science couldn't get done without the necessary policy background. And she introduced me to Andrew and the project he was working on through SEDS. And I kind of started off underneath my friend who helped lead the policy side of this, since this project does break down into policy, technical, and business. She led the policy side. When she had to drop out, I took over that role. And although it changed a lot of aspects of our culture, the coronavirus pandemic definitely let me dump my heart and soul into this. What ended up going from, all right, I'll contribute when need be, to I'm going to spend 8 hours a week 8 hours a day in front of the computer for every day in the month of May, just pouring into this. And that kind of attracted me to it. I realized this would be a chance for me to learn how to write policy papers, how to network, how to conduct interviews. There's this hilarious story where we reached out to 3 people from Aerospace Corp and did a Zoom call. Actually, it was a Skype call, and we botched that interview. It was it was like trying to herd cats centered around space debris, and we were the cats. So this opportunity, the opportunity to test these skills, to learn, to fail at interviewing, to fail at writing a paper, and then improve and grow and eventually submit something worthy of a prize, that's a pretty alluring offer. And that got me to jump on. And one thing led to another. And I ended up taking the head of policy role. And so it kind of stumbled into this glorious thing that I didn't know where it was going, but I couldn't be happy where with it is.
Great life lesson. All the great things that have ever happened to me have been complete accidents too. So I like that. Yeah, this competition actually started for SSPI when I was sitting in a panel session with some very learned people talking about space debris. And by the end of the hour, I was so terrified that we'd never actually be able to go into space again. And I thought, probably time to do something about this. Your team, like all of our teams, had a member of SSPI assigned as a mentor or a reviewer. How did that person help? And let's just mix it up and start with Mac.
So, in all honesty, there was a bit of confusion with our mentor. There was, during the coronavirus pandemic, due to the sudden shift in how everyone's lives operated, for a long time we had to work independently of the mentor. We had to figure this out, kind of beta tested on our own. Andrew really stepped up and took an amazing leadership role. We want to talk about leaders. He was a phenomenal guiding aspect of this, using his flexibility thanks to his gap year to really help. And then when the mentor did finally, everything fell into place due to COVID, he was the primary point contact on it. And it was nice to have a connection into the field, someone who, if I or Andrew or any of other members said something absolutely outrageous, they could look at it as an expert in the field and say, you might want to recheck that. I'm not saying that it's wrong, but it might not be feasible. Andrew can expand more on it than I can. He had much more outreach, but the expertise that they provided was definitely a boon that helped our paper more than I can say.
Andrew, how about you?
Yeah, so Mac, I appreciate those kind words, but I'm not sure I'm deserving of them. Because, so first of all, our mentor was Mark Muktiuk, and I hope I'm saying the last name right. Apologies, Mark, if you're listening to this. But from Astroscale, GNC engineer at Astroscale. And he was, in all honesty, he was fantastic. He was able to provide us with feedback on several different portions of our initial drafts. I think this question is actually a really good one for me personally because it aligns with one of the main challenges that I faced, one of the biggest things that I would change going back, which was project management. I feel that personally, I, as kind of the primary point of contact, and kind of as an extension of our group, could have utilized Mark's experience and expertise in the space sustainability field far more effectively than we did. And I think I sort of unknowingly made it a lot harder on myself and our group, especially in kind of that initial learning phase when we're all researching and getting ourselves up to speed on the topic. I think, he basically, our mentor did as much as he could with what we were able to provide for him. But it was fantastic, I think.
That's a really good comment because project management is actually one of the things that is not taught, generally speaking, in aerospace or mechanical engineering or astrophysics courses, and yet it's fundamental to everything that you're going to be doing in your career, whether you're singing or whether you're teaching or whether you're designing and building very tough technology. It came up actually in some of the debriefs we've done with SEDS leadership in the U.S. and in the U.K. that this is a fundamental of this thing. So I think it's a really good point.
And to echo Andrew, I definitely learned how to use a mentor after the fact. I wish I reached out more. I wish I not pestered them, that's not the right word. I wish I utilized them as a resource, having taken on new projects since. The ability to have a mentor, to have someone who can kindly say, that's brilliant, or that is not at all correct. I wish I could go back and rely on them more and use them more. And that process, that management that they provide, that guidance has now since been critical in my career and my research, which I continue to work on with Andrew on a weekly, daily basis.
Good for you. This was kind of an awful year for university studies, not to mention for an extracurricular project because of this little thing called the pandemic. What impact did it have on your work aside from allowing you to sit in front of a computer for 8 hours a day and work on it? Go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
With me, it was the break between work and life. When you're sitting at your computer and you have no impetus to go to the classroom, to go to the library, or the classroom's just shut down and the library is closed for anything but online book checkout. It is extremely hard to know when to close Microsoft Word or Google Drive or close the computer and go on a walk, say, this is the end of my workday. It's very easy to wake up and put in mediocre work from 8 in the morning to 2 at night, instead of working effectively from 9 to 5 or 8 to 6, whatever your hours is, then being able to back off and enjoy the rest of your life. So having no separation between where I work and where I sleep and where I eat and where I play has really taught me valuable balancing life lessons at this point. And it took me a good 6 months to get that down. I'm still struggling with it. So the big thing is just trying to find, where does work end and life begin when there's no physical separation? I'm sure Andrew can reflect on certain aspects of his own life.
Yeah, I think I sort of had a similar outlook as Mac did, and the circumstances created by the pandemic had a similar impact on me. Um, I know that personally, I mentioned before that I was already taking a gap year with 1 to 2 online classes. So specifically, the change from in person to online didn't affect me as much, or I guess minimally, compared to a lot of my other peers, because you didn't actually have to transplant in person classes to online. They were already designed to be online. Um, that was one of the reasons I sort of de facto became, I think, the project lead, was just because I had the most available capacity compared to everyone else on the team. Um, but Mac raised a really good point about um, learning the value of structure and knowing when to sort of turn your brain off and switch from one thing to another. Um, that was something that I felt I was missing, especially the sort of the fall semester prior to the sort of start of our work in spring in the last spring. And while I think there were definitely some days and some weeks where I went overboard or kind of underboard with how much work I was putting into this project, it was overall far better for me to have that kind of responsibility, um, that I could wake up every day and know and kind of plan out how my day was going to go. I know a lot of my peers struggled with that lack of structure and just kind of staying inside all day and not getting to interact with anyone. Um, and so for me personally, I felt that was sort of one tangential benefit of this project as it related to the circumstances created by the pandemic.
Well, it may comfort you to know that you're not alone in this. I was speaking with a CEO of a company that does space data, and the conversation was complaining about Zoom fatigue, because the day started at 8, and that particular day, the day before, it ended at 8 p.m. because of a conference call in a different time zone. And so I heard, listen to Zoom fatigue for a while, and I finally said, your problem really isn't Zoom fatigue. You just have to say no. You have to say, my day's over. Sorry. It's we'll all get there someday, maybe.
Yeah, it's
In
almost.
terms of,
Oh, go ahead.
no,
Sorry.
no, go ahead.
I was just gonna say it's almost. I don't know if the term necessarily applies here, but I'm gonna use it anyways. It's almost like a catch-22 of sorts, where it's so easy to converse with people over Zoom, but because it's so easy, you have to be able to make that judgment to go one more Zoom call or one less, and it can over time it can make all the difference in kind of your mental state and in terms of fatigue.
Well,
I
yeah, and
also
you also
found,
get worn out really fast. But anyway,
I was gonna say, I also found with classes, it's a lot easier to lose focus when on Zoom. For example, I have this physics class, electromagnetism, semester 2, and it's some complicated stuff, to put it lightly. But over Zoom, it is very easy for me to go read the news, to go look at social media, to just check out. And even if I'm writing down notes and staying attention, it's a lot harder when I'm not in a place that my brain would associate with learning, such as in the lecture hall. Recently, I've had the privilege to be able to go back to class. As of February 14th, we've had hybrid mode. So if you want to go in person in their space, you could go. And there I learned much more easily because my brain associates that lecture hall with it is time to write, it is time to focus. However, if I'm at home and my roommate pulls a pizza out of the oven, what's going to win?
that's
Zoom
not
lecture
fair. That's not. Yeah,
or
I
fresh
think
pizza out of
that's
the oven? It's like
yeah,
you
that
can't
ain't fair.
compete. So
No,
it's that
absolutely.
difficulty to stay focused when there are an abundance of passive distractions versus the mental focus and association that comes with the lecture hall.
That is true. What in this competition? Presumably, you learned a lot in this competition about this particular issue. What's an example of something you learned that you hadn't known about space debris and what can be done about it? Andrew, why don't we start with you?
Um, so what a question, right? Like, I don't even know
Everything?
where to start. I mean, I told you earlier, like think 2, 3 years ago, I'd thought about, in a passing moment about space debris, and then never given it much thought there. And then since then, I think it's not an exaggeration. Since almost over a year ago, I've been learning something new about this topic. Every 2 days, 3 days, I get exposed to something new. So I think one of the most fascinating things to me was relating this idea of space sustainability to sustainability concepts and the sustainability movement back here on Earth, right? It made me think about the environmental impact that space operations have had on space itself, not just on sort of the man-made assets we have in space. There's always this conversation of how can we best utilize and exploit space, in a non-bad connotation way, in order to improve our lives and sort of advance ourselves as a society and a civilization. But one of the things that I started noticing was this conversation about the philosophical debate about whether or not and how we should go about sort of utilizing space. I think that speaks to a larger conversation surrounding the ethical principles that kind of guide our lofty goals of space exploration. For example, the nations that have made the most technological progress in space, like the U.S., Russia, and China, also happen to be the biggest contributors to the existing orbital field. One question that I have is, are there ways that we can maintain the progress that we've been making while still ensuring we do so in a sustainable manner? And adding on to that, how can new actors such as burgeoning space companies like Astroscale, another one is ClearSpace over in Europe, or developing nations with emerging space programs, how can they bring fresh perspectives and novel ideas to the forefront? Space has kind of always been rooted in sort of national security and defense, and there's a lot of traditional ways of thinking about that. And I think space sustainability is one of those topics that seeks to break that mold and open it up, to really, not to wax too poetic here, but to really live out the ideals of the Outer Space Treaty, in terms of making sure that space is the province for everyone, not just a few.
I think it's a very good observation. If it hadn't been for the film Gravity, none of us would really know what we were talking about, would we? Mac, what did you learn from this that you didn't know before?
So my answer isn't quite as poetic as Andrew's, which was just phenomenal. For me, it was more the logistical problems. So focusing on the policy side, what I learned is the biggest potential hazards to space debris, half of those are from a nation that no longer exists. One thing Andrew and I learned is if you were to annually remove the 5 largest objects within 5-10 years, you would half or third the amount of space debris potential that there could be, the collision potential. The problem is a lot of those are Soyuz rockets from the USSR. So you're dealing with property that has potential intellectual connotations from a country that no longer exists. So although the information there might not be sensitive, you are dealing with property and liability claiming that no one really knows how to deal with. So one critical component of this is how do you remove these old rocket parts with potential information on them that the USSR successor might not want to release. So then you answer a question of, well, do you auction them off? Do you salvage and return? And logistical problems that came with that really opened my eyes. And there are definitely solutions within the current legal body. And to Andrew's credit, I think it's going to take these small, burgeoning, focused companies and these new countries with non-traditional ideas and non-traditional approaches to counter this, to build across these gaps, to say, hey, we can make a profit of this while helping you. And I know this is technically gray zone, but it's going to help everyone if we do this, and we'll take it off your hands. And since we're a private company or a party that's not your primary competitor, we can then dispose of this in a way that preserves any intellectual property damages that might occur. So that was something to me which immediately jumped out and that I learned, and I'm still balancing to this day in separate fields. How do you have this open dialogue, this publication of data, while still managing intellectual property that countries and companies are so worried about, especially if it's from a prior nation?
Well, thank you. You just taught me something I didn't know about space debris. So I always like learning something.
We learn something every day.
Try. Well, we're getting toward the end of this. I want to just ask you about the future. You're both juniors. I know that in my generation, you didn't necessarily go to graduate school, but in your generation, you probably do. So what are your hopes for the future, looking forward 2, 3, 4 years? Why don't we start with you, Mac?
Sure. So I will be planning to graduate in the spring of 2023. I'm actually currently still working with Andrew on an initiative here at CU Boulder, the Space Sustainability Initiative, SSI, and it is focused on bringing the ideals of sustainability into space and trying to form these norms of behavior, these space debris practices to best situate and implement the ideals of sustainability into the next generation of space exploration. My particular focus right now is actually on lunar resources. I still am quite involved with the space debris scene, helping to facilitate working groups and note take for them with Andrew. But afterwards, after I graduate, I hope to work in the industry for 3 to 5 years to break my conceptions that I've held through college. One thing that I've been told is when you get out, do not jump straight into grad school if you can. Sometimes the opportunity presents itself in your feet. A company says, hey, we'll pay for your grad school. That's a pretty big incentive. But I want to actually work in the industry, either in the US or with one of its collaborators, whether it's the UK, Luxembourg, Japan, Australia, some other country, and learn how the industry works, learn how public policy, space policy works in practice, get frustrated a few times, and then take that knowledge, take that experience, take this focus that I will then gain, and then go to grad school and then learn, all right, I have all this. How do I refine what I know to then come back out and better the world, better the space situation?
That's a very, very good answer. It was how I felt after I finished 16 years of education. I said, it's about time to stop getting educated and get something done. So in my case, I didn't go back because nobody offered to send me back. But anyway, Andrew, how about you? Last word to you.
What a question, right? I think, Mac, you've definitely planned it out, more, in a more detailed way than I have, but I'll take a stab at it. I think working on this project has kind of shown me how valuable and fulfilling the working in the space sustainability field can be. Matt kind of touched on it earlier, and then we briefly mentioned it during when we discussed kind of our SSPI mentor. But one of the things that we did over the course of this project was conduct various interviews with people in the industry, in academia, and not just orbital debris experts. We talked to insurance brokers, legal experts, professors, SSA experts, all across the board. And one thing that was kind of ubiquitous and the same across all of these interviews was how open and willing and excited everyone was about working on in this subject. And I think that that was one of the things that really started to draw me in, and really wanted me to commit to doing well, and making our final deliverable kind of the best it could be. And um, it got me thinking about pursuing a career in space sustainability, and but beyond that, I'm really not sure where to go. Where to go after I graduate. Mac touched on it a little bit, kind of as it dovetailed quite nicely with the end of our project. But there were several researchers here at CU that actually had just started an initiative called the Space and Sustainability Initiative, and I initially reached out to them, interested in them being, another one of our interviewees, and they let me know, oh, we just started this. It seems like you've already put a lot of work into this. Would you like to come on, and be one of our research assistants? And so Mac and I have kind of just taken that and run with it. We've been exposed to so many different perspectives, so many different wonderful people who have educated us so much. And I think at this point, I can't really say where I want to end up. Only that my experience working and learning about this field has been one of the kind of most rewarding experiences that I've ever had. And so I can absolutely see myself in this field post-graduation. I can't get more specific than that because I honestly have no idea. But I think that's kind of my thoughts on it.
Mac, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, Andrew I don't know, I blanked on this when I was talking, but Andrew reminded me of something. With this group, it helped me to actually form a student group. I'm currently working on putting together a student group focused on this topic, on space sustainability. And this encompasses space debris in its near entirety, since you cannot solve, in my view, you cannot solve the space debris situation without a sustainable approach, or else you will wind up where you began. So this project, this paper that we wrote, these interviews, this research, this networking helped me to learn the skills, to learn the processes, to learn the leadership and the management needed to put together the student group, to work on bringing in new people. Because although I'm going to be in college a little bit longer than Andrew, I'm going to be gone in 2 years, and I want this to keep going. I want students to keep being the loud and questioning voices that they are. Some of the most creative ideas, one thing we found is whenever we talk to someone and we say, hey, we're students engaged in this field, they light up. There is so much drive among people in the industry to include students, to get their ideas thinking, because sometimes they have the most novel and creative ideas because they haven't entered the industry yet and seen how everything comes together, the pre-thought processes. They have no limits basically on what they can think. So I'm creating this student group that will one day maybe expand to other universities, but creating this to continue to funnel this student energy, this student brilliance, to constantly question and provide new concepts and new ideas to future generations when we'll eventually be in the space industry and we become tunnel visioned in the future. If that happens, we'll then have this base of students to go back and say, give us something crazy, give us something novel, give us something that only you would think about. And then we take that with them, bring them into the industry, mentor them, and run with it. And that's what I wanted to leave behind. That's the legacy. And I learned God knows how much from this project when learning how to build the leadership skills, the networking, the interviewing, and the fostering of ideas.
That is very inspiring. I don't think I could have asked for anything more. For myself, I feel pretty good about this. As you keep working on the space sustainability initiative, anything that SSPI can do to help you get some attention for it, share your conclusions as they evolve, we'd be very happy to do that because I think it's of high importance. And there's a lot of people working on this, but as you say, this is a unique and different approach. So Andrew, Mac, I want to thank you so much for spending some time with us today.
Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah.
Great to talk.
Thank you, Robert.
Like any tech industry, the space and satellite business is driven by the ambition, the knowledge, and the skills of an amazing group of new and established leaders, and the young people entering the industry who may become our next generation of leaders. You can learn more about taking out the trash competition and the University of Colorado Boulder team at our website, sspi.org, and look for the Making Leaders campaign. My thanks to Access Intelligence, Airbus OneWeb Satellites, AVL Technologies, Hughes Network Systems, EchoStar, Maxar Technologies, Northrop Grumman Space Systems, SES Global, and ST Engineering iDirect for supporting the Making Leaders campaign throughout the year and making this podcast possible. You can follow us on Twitter at SSPI, or on Facebook or LinkedIn, just search for Space and Satellite Professionals. And if you're not a member, I encourage you to become one by going to sspi.org/join. For SSPI, this is Robert Bell.